90-Day Fiancé. I'm upset with what Joan Kruchov said to Greg Chillak's mom. She was my season 11 favorite but not anymore. I think Joan Kruchov's taunt to Greg Chillak's mom, Lucille, on 90-Day Fiancé has exposed her true intentions behind wanting to marry the American man. Joan traveled to America on a K-1 visa on 90-Day Fiancé season 11. Joan has been facing challenges as she makes her way to the aisle, mainly her having to stay under the same roof as Greg's mom in their house in Long Island, where Lucille has some strict rules. It was after Joan arrived in the US that she realized she and Greg would have to sleep in separate rooms. It made Joan cry. Joan also complained about Greg's house not being organized and didn't like that their two family dogs were allowed on the bed. At first, it looked like Lucille was making Joan feel unwelcome on purpose, especially when she started keeping tabs on how many showers Joan was taking. Joan had literally flown thousands of miles and was tired, so she took a shower before hitting the hay and took a second one when she woke up. However, Lucille was now being compared to Debbie Johnson, and Greg to Colt Johnson. They even have a slot machine at home like Colt did. Joan got to spend some time alone with Greg's mother, Lucille, when Greg headed for his interview for the state job. Lucille took Joan's help in finishing a long-due project, which was sorting through a pile of misfit socks to find matching pairs. Lucille was happy with Joan and even praised her for taking the initiative to clean the bathroom, which Greg could never have. "So I think she's doing all right," Lucille told the cameras. Lucille was trying her best to bond well with Joan and asked her if there was anything Joan didn't like in America. Joan started off by praising Lucille, but while Lucille thought that Joan would tell her about how she missed her food from back home, Joan told her she needed privacy. She told Greg's mom that she was always home most of the time and added, "Think you should go out more." Lucille told Joan her words offended her because it was Lucille's house. Lucille wondered why Joan would say something like that, since she had been more than accommodating to Greg and Joan. Lucille got signals that Joan was not an appreciative person. She was being snarky when she told Lucille, "It is your house, you are free to stay." Joan was more than a little out of line with her comment about Lucille living in her own house. She seemed certain that she was going to leave the house soon and made it known to Greg's mom, who knew her son very well, more than Joan had known Greg. The fact that Greg lived with his mom and didn't have a job should have been things that Joan should have known beforehand. Joan, talking about her past, shows that she lived a better life in Uganda than she does in America. Joan is motivated and headstrong compared to Greg, who has been aimless and doesn't have a plan. Joan could have helped Greg improve his lifestyle instead, and perhaps helped him with some money for both of them to live in a house she liked with the privacy she wanted. It doesn't look like Greg misled Joan because she would have talked about that on 90-Day Fiancé. Joan wants a $3,000 dowry from the unemployed man instead. I never thought I'd say this, but I'm officially done defending Joan Kruchov. She was my season 11 favorite. I stood by her when she had that meltdown at the Moldovan airport because her gluten-free bread got confiscated. I cheered for her when she made Greg Chillak recreate their first date in a medieval costume restaurant. I even excused that one time she dramatically refused to meet Greg's second cousin because she didn't like his aura. To Greg's mom, no. Absolutely not. There's reality TV drama, and then there's just plain disrespect. Let's rewind. Joan and Greg were always a chaotic couple. She's all about moon phases, journaling, and cucumber facials, while Greg is a laid-back Chicago guy who still calls soda pop and spends most weekends ice fishing. Somehow, they worked. Or at least they tried. The tension between Joan and Greg's mom, Maureen Chillak, had been brewing for weeks. You could see it in the way Joan would flinch when Maureen said anything remotely traditional, and the way Maureen would clutch her pearls when Joan talked about her sacred feminine retreat in Sedona. But in episode 9, yikes. Joan crossed a line. It all started innocently enough. The families were gathered for a dinner at Maureen's house. Greg looked nervous, like he was preparing to defuse a bomb with salad tongs. Maureen made her famous pot roast, the same one she makes every Easter, and Joan, without even tasting it, pushed her plate away and said, "I can't eat this. This food is dead energy. It's literally vibrating with sadness." Okay, that was a bit dramatic. But what came next was worse. Maureen, ever the polite Midwestern hostess, smiled and asked, "Can I get you something else, honey? Maybe a salad or some fruit?" And Joan said, "This? I don't eat produce that's been traumatized by capitalism, Maureen. Also, your kitchen smells like oppression." My jaw dropped. Greg's jaw dropped. Heck, the camera guy's jaw probably dropped. Maureen, bless her heart, blinked like someone had just slapped her with a kale leaf. You could practically hear the TLC producers whispering, "We've got gold." But it wasn't gold to me. It was heartbreaking. Here's the thing about Maureen Chillak, she's sweet. She's the kind of mom who sends you home with Tupperware full of cookies and a hand-crocheted potholder. She took Joan into her home, offered her hugs, and even tried doing yoga that one time, and ended up stuck in child's pose for 47 minutes. She didn't deserve that kind of shade. I get it, Joan's quirky. That's why we loved her at first. She wore lace gloves to the beach. She refused to use deodorant because armpits deserve freedom. She made Greg write her a poem every full moon. But there's a fine line between being eccentric and being downright rude, and that night, Joan vaulted over that line like an Olympic gymnast. What made it worse was her total lack of remorse. When the producers asked her in her confessional if she thought she owed Maureen an apology, she laughed. She said, "I'm not going to apologize for having higher vibrations. If Maureen's offended, maybe she should do some inner work." Excuse me? Inner work? Maureen raised Greg on a nurse's salary while going to school at night. She's done enough work, thanks. It was the first time I actually sided with Greg, who up until now had been mostly a human doormat. He pulled Joan aside and gently told her that his mom was trying, that she'd even gone to Whole Foods for the first time to try and understand Joan's dietary needs. And Joan's response? Whole Foods is a scam. I only shop at crystal-infused farmers markets. That's when I knew, I couldn't root for her anymore. I wanted to like her. I wanted to believe she was just misunderstood. But there's a difference between having boundaries and bulldozing other people's values. Joan came into the Chillak household like a tornado of Palo Santo and passive aggression, and she burned bridges faster than she burned her sage bundles. The internet was divided, of course. Some people defended her, saying she was just being her authentic self.